Anyway, I don't know how much of the introduction that Dr. Anu presented I'm worthy of that. I'm merely a researcher, and I've been working in the field for this field basically for last 1 year, and I will be sharing some of my research outcomes, maybe some of the way for the future, if you allow. And so the topic that I'm going to discuss today is we have named it social hydrology, not us basically. So this has been named, I think, around 1980s. So this term was coined, social hydrology, and I basically want to present it as a 21st century approach for the sustainable water resource management. Okay, now this term is sustainable. You know, most of us we use this term very pretty loosely, sustainable, and currently, basically, it has become a trend to use everywhere sustainable, sustainability like that. But I don't know how much of it we literally take into account. How much of this term we basically focus on. Because if we would have taken this project or this term sustainable seriously, then the problem like these things would not have occurred. Basically, for last 20 years or maybe 10 years, we are using this term sustainable in every case, but still we have not come out of any solution for these things. Like I have given these two examples specifically because I believe I am dealing with the most of the people I'm addressing right now are from South India. But it's not that the northern part of India is out of this danger. You know, Delhi, there is a serious problem of groundwater. Then we have the problem with Punjab. Punjab, you know, if you just Google it, you will find out that it is the part of India where there is a severe case of groundwater depletion. Even my own city, Kolkata, there are serious areas, or most of the areas, basically, not with serious water crisis. And the problem is what we have done in last 10 years, probably we have not done anything in that aspect. I'm not saying that it's easy, but the intent should be there. And I don't think there is a serious intent also in that regard to deal with it. Because most of the cases, what we have done, whenever there is a serious water problem, we wanted to deal by sending the water tanker by the municipality, and we have hope that there will be someday some rainfall will be there and the groundwater storage will rise. So that's all that we have done in that case. Basically, in most of the problems that we have dealt with. Now, this one issue that is, I think, I will be focusing more, and that is this reason why. So, for the first thing, we need to understand here why this problem is happening, and one of the reasons that this type of problems occur every time is because our approach or our management approach that we take, these are top-down approaches. Like the people in the government or the people in the bureaucracy, they decide what need to be done, what need to be done for the population. But never it has ever been that it is a bottom-up approach. Like before implementation of any scheme, we never go to the field, we never consult with people, we never bother to even take into account whether how they will respond. So that has been the biggest problem. And in terms of social hydrology, what it does, social hydrology intends to basically fill this gap between the policymakers and the people for whom these policies are targeted. So that is the main objective of this branch of science, you can say. Now, one question may come: Why? Like, I am a trained water resource engineer. I've been working in the water resources field. I faced this question once or twice. That why not give it to the people who are in the field of um, uh, sorry. Why not give it to the people who are working in the field of sociology? Because these people are trained enough. They are doing this thing for years. And the reason is we can outsource this to the people of the sociologists who are working. but anyway we have to bring this thing into account, because what is happening, these people who are in the field of sociology, they are working in their particular area. They don't know how what is the relation between the behavior of the people or the behavior of the society with the groundwater, because they don't have any knowledge about groundwater. And we, on the other hand, as I said, when we take a decision as a bureaucrats, we don't go to the field, we don't go to study what is the social aspects of that, how people's behavior are changing. I will show you an example where a policy in Bihar, in the Kosi Basin, has efficiently changed the behavior of the farmers, how they utilize groundwater. Even it has changed the irrigation pattern, agricultural pattern of that particular field. So that's the power of a any project that we take, or any project that we implement in the ground. So we just think that if we are implementing a water resource project or water supply project, it will just be confined into supplying water to some household. Well, it's not. It alters, it affects the social activities, it affects the behavior of the people, it affects their daily life, and obviously this will again impact the resource that we are dealing with. In our case, it is water, right? So to go to the next, so there was a study that so a study is currently being done by International Association of Hydrological Sciences. They have started from, I think, 2013 to 2022. They are taking a decadal study, and what they have done, they have found out some global hotspot for water crisis, and also for each of these hotspots, they have found out what may be the reason for the water crisis, and also they have found out what may be the outcome of that, what is the effect of that. Now I'm not going to the entire world. If we just focus in India, the reason that they have found out for the water crisis are mostly, as you can see, the lack of understanding or neglect or wider economic, social, cultural perspectives. For example, as you can see, the reasons they have given here is increasing human population, growing water demand per capita, ineffective water use, increasing hydroclimatic variability, presence or planning of large dams, economic growth, widespread access of groundwater, and others. So none of these, I mean, all of these causes that I am presenting here, all of these causes are basically made by humans. All these problems are made by human, and these are effectively, it has to be, it has something or other to do with the behavior of the society and the people. And what is the result of that? As you can see, this colored triangle, different colors, they basically represent what is the effect of this water crisis. As you can see, there is ecological degradation in the northern part of India. You can see the green triangle, that is basically representing the ecological degradation. This is basically in the part of UP and Delhi. Obviously, you will agree with me in that case. Increasing flood risk, that is where I am presently in Assam, Guwahati, in this particular region. Obviously, we are dealing with that. I will show you some slides of some of the work that currently we are doing in this case. Water conflict, thankfully in India, they have not identified any area where there is serious water conflict. Now, obviously, I know there are some water crisis, but probably it's not like what is happening in terms of the Middle East, or what is happening in terms of northern African countries. Right, there is water quality calamity. Obviously, the area that they have presented, it's in the Tamil Nadu region. We know that there is serious water crisis there, and in some parts of the northern India where I don't know what is the actual extent of these triangles, but this area, the water quality calamity part, this comes to the the west, I mean eastern part of India also, that is the West Bengal areas and all, and it is also severely affects the Bangladesh region, which it's not been mentioned here. Anyway, increasing drought severity, and we have the groundwater depletion. Obviously, the groundwater depletion, they have presented it in the region of Mumbai, Maharashtra part. Right. So these are the cause, and these are some of the effects that can come from water crisis. So obviously it's a serious issue, and the reason for that, and almost everybody agrees that the global water crisis is a governance crisis. It has nothing to do with ecology. It is nothing to do with environment. It has nothing to do with rainfall. It is a governance crisis, and thus it is always political, economic, or cultural in nature. So if we are talking about dealing with the water crisis, it is impossible to deal with it without accounting for the people, without talking to the people, without bringing the social aspect into the account. This is the definition of water crisis that they have this project, the IAHS, that is International Association of Hydrological Sciences project they have given. So they have defined it as a intended or unintended consequences of long-term changes of social norms and values, ideology or political system which are not typically anticipated or accounted for coping with water-related issues. So keeping this in background, let us discuss a little bit about how these two things are connected, that is water and society. Water means I'm concerned about all the components of the hydrological cycle mostly, and society. So this, if we can say that we both are interconnected, water and people. How? Like we continuously make alteration in the hydrological cycle, that is in terms of frequency and severity of floods and droughts. How? Through continuous water abstraction, through dams and reservoir construction, through flood protection measures, urbanization, etc. There can be n number of reasons here. And due to that, what happens? There is a continuous modification of frequency and severity of flood and drought. Now, as a result of that, what happens? Because there is a continuous alteration in the frequency and severity of drought and flood, society has to reshape itself every time. We have to respond and adapt spontaneously to this. Now, anytime the society has not been able to adapt to that, what happened, I will show you in the next slide. So, because of all these reasons that we have discussed so far, presently we have overcome this traditional approach, that is limiting the hydrology by accounting the natural interaction. Normally what happens, hydrology is accounted as a interaction between the natural forces, like what is the transpiration, what is the evaporation, what is the groundwater recharge, what is the rainfall, and finally we develop a model. But we never bring into account what happens due to the mutual interaction between society and water. Now, presently, because of all these things, all these reasons that I have discussed, and more interference of human in the system, in the hydrological system, we are coming. Basically, the scientists are now bringing these aspects into the account also. Now, this is not a new concept, basically. So this concept was started, probably we can trace back to Heraclitus, to ancient Greece, where he, one of his famous quotes were, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he is not the same man." And he basically, inspired by him, the last slide that I have shown, that project is called Pantarail. So it means, probably I have spelled it right, pronounce it right. It means everything flows. And this project basically intends to focus in the change of both hydrology and society. Now, I am not a part of this project. We are working separately in the field. So as an introduction, I brought some of the aspects of the project. Okay, now as I said that society has to reshape. Every time there is an alteration in the frequency of flood and drought, society has to reshape. Okay, there are examples in history also, in recent past also, that what happens when the society fails to believe. Now this is a very famous monument, right, Chichen Itza. It's one of the remaining monuments of Mayan civilization. Now the historian, what they say is that one of the reasons that Mayan civilization collapsed is because what happened, they were great with water storages. So they during this civilization, Maya civilization, they used to store water in ground in underground tanks. All the cities of this type, they are filled with this kind of groundwater tanks. Okay, and because of that, since they had this kind of groundwater storage, so their cities started basically, they allowed there were agricultural growth, and this kind of water storage basically they allowed people to overcome these normal and minor drought conditions. But what happened? The population started increasing because every time, whenever there is some kind of facilities are provided, people will be attracted to that. So people went there. The population of the city started increasing. Basically, it increased the reliance on the groundwater resources, and as a result, what happens? These storages, underground storages, they became more and more vulnerable to extreme drought conditions. And as a result, now many of the scientists, they say this was one of the reasons of the collapse of the Mayan civilization. Not only Mayan civilization, I have not given here any figure like that. Even if you take example of our Indus civilization, the same thing happened. The river, basically the Saraswati, most of the sites in case of the Harappan civilization or Indus civilization, they are on the bank of the Saraswati river. So when the Saraswati river dried up, this can be, people say they have to, the cities, all the cities of the Saraswati river, the people has to migrate from those cities. And now one sector of the scientists, they are saying that this can be one of the reasons. We don't have to go back to the prehistoric time. We have some example in our time also, 1980s, 1990s. So what happens in Athens, there is a reservoir called Manos Reservoir. So during 1985, this reserve, 1985, this reservoir basically overflowed. And what happened, 1987, they said that water is a natural gift and there is an undeniable right to every citizen. As a result, people started using water as they want, normally as they do. They started extracting water. And 2 years later, there was a severe drought. And when there was a severe drought, then these reservoirs were pushed to the limit. The entire system was pushed to the limit. What happened, if you remember, after 3 to 4 years back, the same thing happened in Johannesburg. The entire system, entire water supply system was basically forced to the limit, and ultimately there was a conservation measure that was taken. Similar thing happened in case of Lake Mead, the city of Las Vegas. I think all of us has heard of it. So Lake Mead was basically built in order to provide water to California, Arizona, and Nevada. At that time, nobody thought that Las Vegas, I mean, the prediction was it will grow up to 400,000 inhabitants. But since water supply was sufficient, and if you know Las Vegas in middle of a desert, so since the city was basically growing, the water supply was sufficient, and it basically, the city lost about 4 times than the population that was expected. So what happened? They had to create another intake, water intake, to the Lake Mead. Now what it does basically, it increases the vulnerability of the Lake Mead. Now assume there will be a dry year in some time. So this entire lake will be dried up, and the entire city will if there is a continuous drought for a period of 4 to 5 years, maybe the entire city will be in the verge of collapse. So that is the type of problem that I'm talking about here. And that is the type of approaches that we have to take in terms of sustainable. Now, you can see these are all policies. Like Lake Mead, it was a policy that has been developed. In Athens, in case of Manos Reservoir, it was a policy that was developed. Even in case of Mayan civilization, that was a policy. But what they have not accounted for is the behavior of the people. And because of that, all these policies were not sustainable enough. Some way or other, they have to, after some time, they have to, this entire policy has to be changed, or maybe there need to be some modification needs to be done in that aspect. Right. Now the thing is, have we learned anything from that? That is the question. Now let us come to our study. Okay, sorry. So this kind of approach that I have said, there is a term in terms of economics. It is called Jevons paradox. So what it does basically, as you can see, if so suppose we have a water supply system, we have a reservoir storage, suppose. and we are supplying water from that reservoir storage. Now, as a result, what happens? The dependency on that particular storage increases, as it has increased in case of Lake Mead, or in case of Monos Reservoir, or as I've said, in terms of the groundwater storage system in case of Mayan civilization, or maybe Saraswati River in case of our civilization. So what it does, the water supply basically, so it increases so from this reservoir we supply the water. Okay, it affects basically the water storage. Every time we are supplying water, it affects the water storage. Now, it basically creates a water shortage on that particular reservoir. And whenever there is a water shortage, it obviously has some economic aspects. Now, whenever there is an economic aspect, we know there will be a public pressure. We have seen it in terms of COVID. When there was last year, when there was a lockdown, that time the economy was driven to the limit, and because of that there was a huge outcry, and now that is one of the reasons that the government is fearing to take another measuring step of similar magnitude, you can say. Right, so every time there will be economic damage, there will be a public pressure created. And whenever there is a public pressure, what normally government does, they goes back to the same storage. Okay, so the government or the policymakers, they will go back to the same reservoir storage, like what happened in case of Lake Mead. They created another intake. So basically, gradually, what will happen? This will increase the dependency on a particular source of water. And every time there will be a increase, the dependency on a particular source of water will increase. It will increase the vulnerability of that particular storage. And as a result, what will happen? The economic damage. It will again contribute to the economic damage. So this entire paradox, this is called as Zevon's paradox. The problem is the governments or the environmentalists generally assume that if we increase the efficiency, then it will lower the resource consumption. But most of the cases, it doesn't happen like that. If we increase the efficiency, normally the consumption of the resource increases. That I will show you in our case study that we have done. So this is the study that we have done. So whatever I have said, this is basically prelude to our actual study. So this was introduction so far. So what we have done here, we have done a case study in the Kosi Basin. Now Kosi Basin is in Bihar district. This is the part, basically the part with the green area. So it is in the border of Bihar and Nepal. The Kosi is a tributary of Ganga. And we have taken this area primarily because, as if you see in the map, in the figure D, okay, most of the areas are utilized for agricultural activity. To be specific, 94% of the area that is used for agricultural activities mainly. And this area is heavily used for agricultural activity, and because of that, we have taken. Now, it's not that we have taken this study in order to apply the social hydrological concepts. One of our research scholars was working on this particular area. So when we had this idea, we had the data, groundwater data of this particular region for last 10 years. And since we had the data, we have already done work on this particular area. We tried to understand why not we see what is happening there in terms of social hydrology. So that is how we basically came to this particular region. Okay, now if we take a look at the socio-economic activity of that particular area, in terms of, this is basically the socio-economic activity of Bihar. We see after 1970, obviously we know there was a green revolution program, and after that everything, productivity, production, agriculture, productivity and production, they were on the rise basically. But here in Bihar, after 1984, the economic and agricultural production and all these things, they started coming down gradually. As you can see, 94 and 2004, the productivity and production rate started gradually declining. In 2004, what Bihar government did, they implement the MSTP, that is called Million Shallow Tube Well Program. What it does essentially is it distributes 1 million shallow tube well to the population. Over a few years span, they will distribute 1 million shallow tube well. Now, if you relate to the Zevon's paradox, as they have said, so basically what they are doing, they are basically increasing the efficiency of groundwater extraction. with the hope that this will reduce the consumption. As a result, what is happening, you can see in terms of the million shallow tubewell production, there is again the growth came back onto track. The per capita net domestic product increased significantly. The productivity and production, which was coming down earlier, that also started increasing. And the net irrigated area of that particular area also started increasing. Okay, so what we tried, this is a policy that has been implemented. Now our objective was to find out what effect of these, apart from these growth terms, like all this growth, okay, that these terms are fine. Now our objective was to find out how sustainable this plan is. Okay, because like all other plans, as I said, this is a top-down approach. So they have just taken the decision, the growth was coming down, we have to take some step, we have to, and as a step, they wanted to boost the agricultural activity. How can they boost the agricultural activity? They have to extract groundwater more. In order to extract groundwater more, they have distributed these shallow tube wells. Now, what we tried to understand, how sustainable this plan is. Is it sustainable? Is it in par with the resources that we are dealing with? That is the groundwater, even the Kosi River, the surface water, are all, both the things are going hand in hand. The resources consumption and the agriculture or the growth, as you can say, right? So how we did that, basically, we first taken the AET data, that is the actual evapotranspiration data. Now, I believe all of us know what the evapotranspiration is, actual evapotranspiration. For those who doesn't know, evapotranspiration basically gives us the groundwater, that the water that has been consumed, that has gone out of the soil, basically, or that has gone out of the storage. Right. So it basically gives us a measure of what is the ground of what is the surface water and groundwater that has been utilized. Now, what we do in basically in ISRO or the people, we have taken the data from ISRO. Now, what that does basically, so they calibrates and they find out from this what is the groundwater consumption. So now, if we are talking about groundwater utilization, we don't have to go to the ground and we don't have to measure that. We can just take into account the actual, there are satellites. So MODIS and NOAA. These are the two satellites there. These data we can from that data they have already, there are calibrated and validated data. So we can take that data and we can always use this data for measuring the groundwater that has been extracted. So basically these plots overall, this gives us an estimate of how much groundwater that has been extracted by the plants for the irrigational activity, actually, we can say. So this is a plot of 1982. So if we take a look at 1982, the red areas basically represent where the AET value, groundwater consumption, is extremely high. And the blue areas basically represent where the groundwater extraction is extremely low. So if we start from 1982 March, you can see there are large areas in March where there are high value of groundwater extraction. Now this has to do with the agricultural activity. We have matched this data with the agricultural activity. This corresponds to the peak growth stage of the Rabi crop. So as you can see, in India we have primarily two crops, Rabi and Kharif. Kharif crop, that is in the monsoon season, and the Rabi crop that is harvested during the winter season. Okay. So this is the peak growth period of the Rabi crop. Okay, and because of that, because during the peak growth period the crop will require more water, so that's why during this period there was high groundwater consumption during this period. Now during the next month, as you can see, April and May, there is a sudden fall of groundwater utilization, and this is because during April and May, this is the harvesting month of the Rabi crop, and as a result, since there are no crop on the ground, so there were a decline in the water utilization for agricultural activities. Next, if we take a look, there is a rise of groundwater utilization from June till October. October it peaked, it reached. So this is, if you remember, this is the Kharif period, Kharif crop period, and which is the main crop period in India. So as you can see, this will be the Kharif. From June, so they will start the cultivation of the crops. and October basically it will reach the peak growth period, and October they will be harvested. So after October again there was a decline in the groundwater utilization because the crops were harvested. Again from November and maybe December, again they will go for some kind of Rabi crop. So this is the traditional crop calendar in India, and we can see during 1982 this was the traditional crop calendar that was followed. Now let us fast forward to 10 years. Okay, let us see what is happening in 1998. In 1998, as you can see, earlier it was in March that we saw the peak groundwater utilization values, or the groundwater utilization values. But now they have shifted to April and May. That is basically, we can say that the earlier the peak growth of Rabi crop that was during March, that has now shifted to April and May, these 2 months. And also one thing that was interesting, that now one thing we should keep in mind, that the groundwater utilization, rate of groundwater utilization, or the groundwater extraction systems in 1998, they were far more than what was in 1982. So people, compared to 1982, during 1982 the agricultural activity were all based on mostly the rainfall. So the groundwater extraction, even if there was there, I am not saying there were none, but even if there were not there, it was very less compared to what was during 1998 and 1999 season. Okay, so people were extracting groundwater more. As a result, what happened during June to October, as you can see, the intensity of groundwater extraction from June to October, that has come down to some value. And this basically, this particular region, it is subjected to flood every year during this period, July to September, this period. Okay, so almost same thing again. From July to October, there is a high value of groundwater utilization, and again it came down during November, which is after the harvesting of the Kharif crop, and the same trend followed from January to February and to April. There was again a certain increase. Now from this plot we can see there was kind of 1 month shift of the agricultural activity. So earlier, which crop, the Kharif crop, they were starting, I mean Rabi crop, which were basically peak growth period was in March, that has shifted to April and May. Now similarly, the there is another crop that is cultivated basically, that is the Z crop. Z crop is just before the Kharif crop. There is a cultivation of this crop, and this is some of the area where you can see high value of red patches. This area where these Z crops are cultivated. Now it was really interesting when we studied what is happening in 2010. Now remember 2010, the NSTP was in place. There were there was serious increase in the groundwater utilization system, and people are not dependent on rainfall anymore. Now you can see, if we take a look at 2010, we cannot predict one specific trend or a specific crop calendar as it was in 1982. 1982 we can separate that this is the Kharif crop calendar, this is the Rabi crop calendar, like that, and we can see a cyclical crop calendar. But in this case, there is no crop calendar. As you can see, all months there are some patches. There are some areas where there are high groundwater consumption, some areas there are low groundwater consumption. And what it essentially means that now agriculture doesn't depend on the meteorological factors like rainfall and all. Now it depends on the wish of the farmers, as you can say. So if he feels, because now he has a groundwater extraction system, now he can effectively extract the groundwater. He doesn't have to depend doesn't have to depend on the rainfall to supply water. He can anytime he can go to the field and supply water. So that is the reason some parts now the agriculture completely depends on the farmers' behavior. And one of the reason, and another thing that we have found out, that the agricultural intensity of agriculture between June has come down significantly. The reason is every time there will be a flood in this period, during this period from July to August, and because of the flood there will be economic damage to their agricultural, their crops basically. So people have shifted from that period to a more Rabi crop or the winter crop or maybe to the Kharif crop period. So that is why the intensity of cropping during July and August has increased. Yes, during July has increased, during May and June and July has increased, but the intensity of cropping during October has come down. So that is because of the reduction in the Kharif cultivation. So this is evident that the whatever strategy that were taken in the government level has altered the behavior of the farmers. Now, how does it change the groundwater storage? That was our main objective, to find out how it has changed the groundwater storage and extraction pattern. So what we basically did a soil water balance budgeting, soil water budgeting approach, where it is simple kind of. So the storage is basically rainfall minus infiltration minus the actual evapotranspiration, and from that we find out. So this is basically the comparison of 82 and 2010. As you can see, the difference between the both the years. During 82, we have the well-defined calendar here. This is the Kharif crop period, and from February to March, January to March, you have the Rabi crop calendar. And during from April or May to June, basically we have the Zaid crop. And in case of 2010, you see there is no crop period or there is no crop calendar. Every month there are some patches where there are high agricultural activity, there are some patches where there is very low agricultural activity. Okay, so now let's come to this aspect. So these are basically the groundwater storage and utilization values. Okay, and we presented them in terms of some indices. So we divide into four seasons, that is pre-monsoon, monsoon, monsoon surplus, that is the October month, and the winter. These indices, basically what it does, these indices represents how high or low the groundwater extraction or recharge was compared to the average value. And this SPI basically represents the rainfall intensity, same, how high or low the rainfall was with compared to the average rainfall of these 14 years. Okay, now I'm not going to the all sub-basin level. Let us come to figure D, that is the Kosi basin. So as you can see, till 1998 here, what is happening, these blue columns or the green column, blue columns basically represent pre-monsoon pumping index. So during the pre-monsoon, how much pumping has been done, that is represented. And the green ones, basically winter pumping index. So basically during winter, how high or how low pumping has been done. So during this period, as you can see, the pre-monsoon or the monsoon pumping index, these values are extremely low. That basically represents that the groundwater that is being extracted for the cultivation of Rabi crop or maybe the Zaid crop, that is minimum. But we can see there some high yellow bars which represent the monsoon surplus pumping index, that is the groundwater extraction for the October period, where the peak growth of the Kharif crop happens. Okay, you can see some high value. So basically during this period, up to 1998, we can see the agriculture focus of the agriculture was mainly the Kharif crop. Okay, so if there was some supply, groundwater surplus was supplied to the crop, that was for the Kharif crop mainly. And as you can see, during this period, the entire area rainfall was sufficient rainfall received. Okay, but after 1998, we see there was a change in the behavior of the farmers. So we can see some high bars during some high groundwater extraction during pre-monsoon period and during the winter period also. But interestingly, the main alteration came after 2004, or to be more specific, after 2007. After 2007, you see this rainfall came down significantly. It was a dry year. Basically, 2008, 9, and 10, the rainfall received in the Kosi Basin was very less. Normally, what happens when there is a dry year, as you can see, 2005 and 6, the groundwater extraction is very low. As you can see, 2005 and 6, this bar are in the downward direction. So if there is a dry year, there will not be so much agricultural activity and groundwater extraction will be less. But since 2004, since they have now efficiency of groundwater extraction has increased, in 2008, 9, and 10, though it was dry year, groundwater recharge, the red marks basically represent groundwater recharge. Groundwater recharge was in negative, basically very low groundwater recharge, but still people were extracting groundwater, as you can see, for agricultural activity. So the plot that I had, socio-economic plot that I have shown during the economic growth plot. So this is basically done even during the dry years, they are extracting groundwaters. Even during when the recharge is less, they are extracting groundwaters, and that is basically fueling the your economic growth, which cannot be a sustainable model. Because of that, obviously there will be a depletion in the groundwater. There will be depletion in the groundwater table. And in the next stage, basically, and since as you can see here, the trend is obviously evident that as a result of the policy that has been implemented, because of the policy, now people are utilizing groundwater more and more, even during the dry years, even during there is no rainfall, and which is not good for the groundwater storage. And as a result, we compare with the groundwater data, and as a result, the entire basin, the groundwater has gone down significantly. Now, this doesn't only affect the groundwater. This also affect the river itself. As you can see here, this plot here. So here, what we are representing the river to aquifer flux exchange, because you know the river and surface water and groundwater, there is always a flux exchange between them. So as we can find out from this study, we did this study in mud flow, visual mud flow. And in visual mud flow, what we found out, because of the altered behavior of the farmers in the region, the flux exchange from river to aquifer, that is river, because the people are extracting more and more groundwater, so groundwater table is basically depleting day by day. As a result, since the groundwater table is depleting, so there is a flux transfer from river to aquifer. As a result, the surface flow of the Kosi River is coming down. Now, this we are on the process of studying this for the next 10 years, 2010 to 20. Okay, in order to come to a conclusive evidence. But from the period, basically from 2006, what we observed, the flux exchange, what was there during 1996, it has increased up to 2% of the river flux, that is the river flow, surface flow, by 2% around. And the flux exchange from aquifer to river, that is which earlier the river used to gain water from the aquifer, that has gone down significantly in many of the aspects. So that is the final, in terms of final conclusion, we may say that the policy that was taken in 2004, that has consequences in terms of groundwater extraction, groundwater storage. It is also affecting the surface river stage of the water. Stage of the river, that is the depth of the river, or this flow of the river. So if we now, obviously, before making any conclusion, we are in the process of studying for the next 10 years. But if this trend continues, we all know what happened to rivers like Yamuna or rivers like Narmada. So this river, if this fashion continues, maybe Kosi River will become another river, I mean, which is currently a free-flowing river, will become another, we can say Nala or a stream like Narmada, where there will not be sufficient water to supply. And if this river dries up, then the entire economic activity of the entire region will be collapsed. Right. So there is another aspect that we are currently working. I will just give a brief of that. That is the flood of Assam, because we are currently in Guwahati, and every year this entire area is devastated by flood. You know, and normally whenever there is a flood modeling, what people do, they try to understand what is happening due to alteration in land use, land cover, what is happening due to alteration in terms of climate change and all these things. But there is another aspect that we normally neglect, that is the effect on the population, because every time after the flood there will be flood relief distribution, and the relief distribution and the evacuation of people, these must be done based on solid knowledge on the ground. Like, I will give you some example how the effect of the flood that we call, or the flood damage, that depend significantly on the socio-economic activity. So these are the two areas. One is the Nagaguli, this particular village is called Nagaguli, and there is another village, Kachari line. So these two villages are on the other side of the embankment. The Kachari line is basically between Kachari line and Nagaguli. There is this embankment, okay, or the high road that is being created. So Kachari line is basically near the river. After Kachari line there is an embankment, and then the Nagaguli village. Okay, so the Kachari line, this village is around 500-meter distance from the river, and Nagaguli, this is around 1 kilometer distance from the river. When we went to this village, the damages that is caused, the distance between these two villages are around 500 meters. But the damage that is caused by the flood, that is significantly different. As you can see, in case of Kachari line, the inundation period is 4 to 5 months of a year. So basically, for 4 to 5 months, this entire area remains under water, and these people has to be displaced every time. They don't have any constant source of occupation. Okay, they don't have any proper accommodation, because every 4 and 5 months they have to relocate from there. On the other hand, Nagaguli, these people, they are comparatively safe because they have this embankment in between them, and they have insurance also, because most of the people here they work in a tree plantation farm. So as you can see, just because of the embankment, the inundation period has come down to 15 to 30 days. And so these are the kind of, and there is no significant damage also, because these people, they live in houses that has been made by the tree plantation firm. So they are not so exposed to the flood, where the people in the Kachari line, they are very much exposed to the flood. There is another example. So this is a traditional Mising village. Mising is a community here in Assam. What they do when they build some houses, they build the houses on a raised platform. Okay, now this village is around I think 1.5 kilometer distance from the river, and this entire area, if you look closely, the entire area basically is inundated every year for around 4 to 5 months, like that. So this area gets inundated for 4 to 5 months. But these people, they said that there is no significant damage to them, because their houses are on a raised platform. So whatever it may happen, they are not losing houses. And this is one of the significant problems here, because the houses get devastated and the people die, people have to relocate. But these people, though they live near the river, there is a significant inundation during this period, and when there is significant damage due to the flooding, but these people normally they don't have to relocate. They have, maybe some people have to relocate for 15 days, like that. And because they have houses in a raised platform, and they also developed a rescue operation based on the community base, they are not being affected. So these type of factors. So when we are taking policies like distribution of flood relief, or maybe rescue operation of all these things, or distribution of the resources, state resources, or when we are trying to build an embankment, like as I said, the embankment was built, so the other village, Kachari line, they are being affected more after the development of the embankment. So when all these policies we are implementing, we never basically we need to go and we need to account for what will be the effect to the people. At least we can do a survey for the in the entire region, so that we can bring the opinion of the people, and we can then these policies will be sustainable. Otherwise, if we continue to take down this kind of top-down approach, then it is extremely difficult. So this is another area. Similarly, Majuli, if you heard, this is the biggest riverine island of I think Asia, or maybe the whole world. I'm not sure. Okay, so this is the same kind of situation that we have observed. So yes, that is the final conclusion. So whenever we are, so now in 21st century, when we are when we are doing research, especially in the field of hydrology and water resources, I think it is now high time that we account for the society. It doesn't matter that the sociologists do, but we have to account for them. It doesn't matter if the sociologists are doing, we have to incorporate their knowledge. We just cannot go around and take similar top-down plans and implement those plans without accounting for the people, because in most of the cases in long run these plans will not be sustainable until or unless we really know what is happening on the ground and how society and people depends on, and how their behavior varies due to the implementation of these plans. So with that I would like to conclude my talk. So thank you very much.